What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the channel. My name is Michael, and I hope you are having an awesome day. So, I just did another part of the Battle of Berlin. Got a comment that this is the follow-up to the Battle of Berlin. Talked about all the, kind of the chaos going on in Berlin at that time and the after effects, which many of us are a part of, and we have seen throughout the Cold War and even recent events that are going on. This was this was a defining moment in World War II as far as ending the war from the German European side and the after effects. So, Hearts of Iron, Sabaton history, drop the like, let's go.
I'm Per from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton history.
A German soldier defying Hitler's orders might sound dangerous to you, and it was, but for one man, it was necessary to save many lives.
And we were looking for a story where the Germans was not always the bad guys.
A story which I'm going to tell you right now, and then Per's going to tell you about the song. From the beginning of the Soviet Union's final World War II offensive towards Berlin on April 16, 1945, the situation on the Eastern Front had deteriorated rapidly for the Germans. By the 22nd, Soviet Tank Corps spearheads were already starting to surround Berlin from the north and the south. With the encirclement of Berlin soon at hand, German high command from the bunkers under the city center were calling for immediate assistance. The 12th Army, under General of the Panzertruppe Walter Wenck, had just retreated east of the Elbe at this point, fighting a losing battle against the American advance from the west. Now beyond the river, they could make a stand while providing a tactical reserve against that advance. But the Führer's orders changed their enemies. Now, Wenck's 12th was ordered to strike to the east, into the Soviet flanks, and to relieve Berlin. However, what was called an army, a corps, or even a detachment this late in the war was often nothing more than a mixed group of veterans, stragglers, wounded, and conscripted youngsters and middle-aged and even old men. Wenck's 12th had a large group of basically kids from the Hitler Youth, young men who hadn't finished school, and they were now tasked with taking on Russian tanks. According to General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel, they were to unite with additional Panzer Corps, Tank Corps, under General Field.
You gotta appreciate the fact when he talks about some of these names, he does it in an accent. You gotta appreciate the humor and the accents.
Steiner to the north, while the trapped 9th Army would make a break to the west and join them. Together, they were to relieve the capital from the Soviets, who had over 1 million men advancing. It was a plan, at least, but one that only existed on paper. Wenck's army had only recently been reorganized with men from all branches that could still fight. That was the only requirement. But even this late in the war, the German army was still able and reliable, and they still had fight in them even in a futile battle. The army's diaries of this day read, "No deserters, no prisoners, no missing."
Hold on a second, I just want to hear that part one more time.
German army was still able and reliable, and they still had fight in them even in a futile battle. The army's diaries of this day read, "No deserters, no prisoners, no missing."
Could ever have believed? Seems like nothing's been achieved. Just to walk a day, go all the way. The fronts are closing in as the end is drawing near. The 12th Army interfere. Open up a route, get people out. Its forces spread out there.
The 12th Army was heading to Berlin. They had only a few vehicles and tanks, mostly mobile assault guns, and little fuel, so the men had to make the 150 kilometers to Berlin on foot.
Jeez.
By the 25th, they had reached the outskirts of Berlin, but the situation had worsened dramatically. The Soviets were already south of Potsdam and east of Brandenburg an der Havel, west of Berlin. The surrounding of the capital was nearly complete, and the Soviet forces were much stronger than anticipated. While examining his maps, General Wenck hesitated. Was relieving Berlin even possible at this point? In talks with Keitel, though, the orders from the bunkers under Berlin were clear. Get the Führer out. His destiny is Germany's destiny. Only you, Wenck. Only you have the power to save Germany now.
Wow.
So Wenck went to work. The only chance to relieve Berlin at this stage was to split his troops towards the north and south and relieve as many of the defending German forces around Berlin as possible so they could make up a small reserve for an attack towards Berlin itself. This would maybe destroy enough Soviet forces or just hold them back enough to give Berlin some breathing space and for civilian refugees to escape the city. But even that would only be temporary.
Wow.
But Keitel rejected this plan. Berlin itself had highest priority. A push toward the Fuhrer must be done immediately, and that's it. Well, Wenck knew that this would quickly be the suicide of his army, and he realized that German high command had totally lost touch with the situation and the reality of the war. Steiner's tanks in the north were already being pushed back, and the 9th was fighting for its life. In this situation, Wenck chose not to follow the direct orders from Adolf Hitler himself. Instead, he, quote, had to follow the guideline of his conscience.
Good. Good, that's important. You know, trusting your guts, your instincts, you seeing things that other people aren't. I appreciate that and respect that. You know, but it's crazy. I mean, these are gut-wrenching decisions, you know, and obviously decisions that you're going to lose sleep on because you're, in a sense, gambling with people's lives to make the best possible decision. But you got to trust your conscience and your guts.
Saving Berlin was impossible. The only thing his army could maybe achieve was getting as many people away from the Soviet advance as possible. By attacking towards Potsdam, he would relieve the encircled garrison there. And by creating a corridor from there towards Berlin, they'd be able to let refugees flee the city. An attack to the south would give the 9th Army a chance to join their lines. Wenck called this his Rettungswerk, pretty much his rescue mission. Only on this would he gamble the lives of his young soldiers. In the early morning hours of April 26, the final German offensive of the war began.
Who'll survive and who will die? Up to Kriegsglück to decide. Those who made it cross without a loss have reason to reflect. It is not about Berlin. It is not about the Reich. It's about the men who fought for them. What peace can they expect?
Elements of the 12th Army made their way northeast. The key to their advance was the infantry division Hutten, hardcore veterans who had just days before recaptured Wittenberg from the Soviets and held off overwhelming forces for days. Now they were the wedge that drove into the Soviet positions with artillery and tank hunters. The Soviets were totally caught off guard by the attack, and by midday, the 12th Army had advanced 18 kilometers toward the city of Bielitz. On Hutten's flank were the elite Scharnhorst Grenadiers, who pushed down the Autobahn through the night, throwing themselves against the tenacious Soviet defense. House-to-house fighting against superior heavy tanks was vicious and costly, and they often had to resort to close-range attacks with Panzerfausts, single-shot anti-tank guns. They went days without sleep or sufficient food, while the Soviets were constantly reinforced, but despite heavy casualties, they made progress towards Berlin. By May 1st, the 9th Army had managed to use the momentum of the 12th and break out of their encirclement. Spirits rose as the exhausted soldiers of the 9th and the hundreds of civilians with them joined the 12th. But seeing the ragged and wounded men limping into his ranks, Wenck marveled at Hitler's insane plan to fight the Soviets head on. The 9th had been nearly destroyed just fighting for its survival and the survival of the many civilians in its midst. Other fighting forces were able to link up with Wenck as well. And the same day, Hutten reached a large German military hospital near Potsdam. Once more, the fighting was brutal as they stormed the Soviet trenches, but for 24 hours, they were able to get many hundreds of wounded soldiers, nurses, and Red Cross personnel out before the Soviets could return. This was the very end of the European part of the war, and it is difficult to find and follow the reports from the last days of the fighting around Berlin. The Germans did not make many records. The Americans also often didn't record a lot of it, and the Soviet archives are still not fully available. Neither Steiner nor Wenck reached Berlin, though, and Hitler chose suicide over capture in his bunker.
It's the end of the war. Reach for endless joy.
On On May the 2nd, Wenck's army retreated. It would protect the refugees and bring them across the Elbe and into American custody. Day and night they marched, avoiding contact with the enemy from the east as long as possible. Soviet pursuit, though, was initially weak, as they were concentrating on taking Berlin. On the 3rd, Wenck made contact with American General William Simpson of the 102nd U.S. Infantry Division of the 9th U.S. Army near Tangermunde. Now, the Allies had agreed among themselves that either the German army would capitulate as a whole, or that small groups could capitulate to them individually via their commanding officers. But there was a hitch. This partial capitulation could only happen to the opponent they're actually engaged with, which for Wenck was the Soviets. To surrender to the Americans, Wenck technically would have to attack them and then surrender. Well, the Americans simply kept silent in regard to the surrender proposal. They did not fire on the advancing Germans either, in violation of the Allied contract. Still, General Simpson let the wounded cross the river, but only with just enough medical supplies for them. Same with Wenck's soldiers and their personal provisions, but he would not allow civilians to cross. Men were even sent out with whips on the partially collapsed bridge to hold back civilians trying to cross with the soldiers. It could have been more of a human tragedy were it not for sudden Soviet fire that rocked the remnants of the bridge. This killed several American soldiers, so a 2-kilometer retreat from the river was ordered. This allowed civilians to cross the river.
Wow.
Wenck's army soon had to fight the Soviets, though, who had renewed their attacks once they realized what was going on. With each break in the lines, Wenck had to order young men to their deaths to recapture and hold positions for just an hour or two so that others could live. It was a final act of self-sacrifice in a war that was essentially over. As the last German grenades were shot, the last artillery pieces and the last tanks were blown up, and then the last German soldiers, among them General Walter Wenck himself, crossed the river and entered American captivity. In the end, thousands of soldiers, civilians, nurses, women, children, and the elderly were saved from the fall of Berlin. As an end note here, on the 8th of May, as the very end came, many men and women attached to the 9th Army were extradited back to the Soviets. To this day, we don't know the exact reasons for that, though we do know that there were several suicides to escape that fate.
Wow, that's, I mean, the cool thing about hearing these different perspectives of the different stories is getting these little elements. You know, like, that's so honorable, you know, to basically, in a sense, your men know that they're on a suicide mission, but they're there to protect the civilians, which is who they originally decided to basically kind of protect. And obviously Hitler was all aggro, but, you know, just defending the civilians. And I mean, I can't even imagine that, getting a message from your companion general where it's basically, hey, you're going to have to go back out there, but you're creating a buffer zone so these people can live. Like, that is, you know, as a male, and just like my mentality, that would be one of like the biggest honors, you know. And obviously, yes, okay, you're going to pass away, okay, there's that, yeah, I get that. But at the same time, the honor of knowing like you're saving people's lives, like, that is such an honor. And, you know, the songs dedicate that, the Hearts of Iron, to them is just, it's absolutely amazing. It's really cool to see these, you know, these little bits and pieces of like, there were heroic acts on, you know, every side. There were, you know, sacrifices made on every side. There were, you know, things that obviously amidst the chaos were still, you know, just kind of just like self-sacrificial and just important, and like, just, you know, self-sacrificial is not the right word, but just, it's just really, it's cool to see the humanity come out and just, you know, that love for others. And crazy times. I mean, there's a lot of history with World War II and World War I and all these different wars that Sabaton is covering, and really cool just to get a deep dive. But anyways, this was Hearts of Iron, Battle of Berlin. I'm going to go ahead and check out the original music video. So be sure to subscribe, stay tuned, drop a thumbs up, and let's get into it. And as always, stay healthy, stay happy, and have a blessed day. Peace.